In 1995, a small game development studio called Remedy Entertainment was founded in Finland, and about a year later they released their first game for MS-DOS called Death Rally. It's been 24 years, and this studio has produced some of the most unique and engaging takes on the narrative action game. From the dark streets of a film noir New York City to the depths of otherworldly horror, Remedy have taken us on journeys with great heroes, taken us to battle mighty villains. We've lost loved ones and been inspired and heartbroken in equal measure, as well as being introduced to the wonderful music of Poets of the Fall. And so now, we come to the end of our journey. The last stop. The place this train was always heading, passing beyond even the most bizarre and darkest depths of Cauldron Lake, into the realm of something unknown and surreal. The new and weird, you might say. It's finally time for us to enter the oldest house. A place of power. A force unlike anything we've ever encountered before. This is Control. This may be one of the hardest stories I've ever had to talk about. Because, just like Half-Life, only a small percentage of the actual story is told directly through the events of what could be considered the main campaign, with the rest being discovered as you explore the game. In many ways, this story is the complete antithesis of Quantum Break, which was very focused on telling over showing, even to the point of having you put down your controller for 30 minutes at a time to watch a show that further explained what was going on in the game. I really did like Quantum Break, but I consider Half-Life to be, in many ways, the absolute apex of discovering a story through play, and in that respect, this game is much more my thing. It does make it a lot harder to talk about though, so rather than try to give you a synopsis of the events of the main quest, I thought I'd divide this up into 3 sections of the Black Pyramid. 3 sections that cover the game's most important players. That being our point of view character and protagonist Jesse, the oldest house, and the F.B.C. You're going to need to be well acquainted with all 3 of these elements to piece together the entire picture. And even then, you aren't going to understand everything that happens. So, with that in mind, let's talk about Jesse. Jesse Faden is a young woman who has been through more than her share of bad times. Her opening monologue, describing the world we know as a room with a picture that's hiding a hole that leads to only God knows where, is a little disturbing. Either way, this woman walks through the front door of the oldest house and simply strolls into the offices of the Federal Bureau of Control. Like entering restricted buildings that house shady government agencies is just what she does of a Tuesday tea time. We could write off her indifference to the oddly deserted nature of the building, or the fact that the janitor seems to be able to read her mind, as nothing more than bad writing, if it weren't for who was writing this. No, this girl has been down some dark tunnels, and she's seen some awful things. And while we never get a full grasp of the extent of her experience, we eventually come to discover that when she was a child, she and her brother Dylan uncovered a slide projector in the landfill site of her hometown of Ordinary. When this projector was activated, it created portals to numerous other planes of existence depending on which of 9 slides were inserted into it. The very short version of the story starts with Jesse and Dylan making contact with a resonance-based lifeform found on a red sand desert world within what the Bureau refer to as Slide 36. This creature claimed that Jesse and Dylan were special. Jesse named this entity Polaris, as she felt it was in some way guiding her. The story takes a lot of twists and turns, but basically ends with all the adults in the town of Ordinary disappearing before the Men in Black style F.B.C show up to confiscate the projector. They also attempt to take Jesse and Dylan into custody, but Jesse manages to escape, leaving her brother in the hands of the Bureau. Polaris itself keeps in contact with Jesse throughout her life. While Jesse did technically escape the Bureau, they didn't exactly give up on her. Rather, they simply opted to observe her while she lived a regular life. Meanwhile, Dylan was taken into the oldest house and identified as a para-utilitarian, someone who can wield objects of power. These are objects that have been altered by strange events and are mostly very dangerous. In the right hands, however, they can grant the wielder extraordinary powers. Dylan was entered into the Bureau's Prime Candidate program, which groomed and prepared potential candidates for the role of Bureau Director. And while Dylan did show incredible potential, we do eventually discover that things didn't exactly work out in this regard. On October 29th, 2019, after a considerable search, Jesse located the oldest house and the Bureau. When she attempts to talk to the current director, Trench, she discovers that she arrived moments too late. And following the advice of Polaris, picks up the service weapon. This takes Jesse on her first jaunt into the astral plane to deal with the Board, an extra-dimensional entity that basically runs the F.B.C. and effectively become the de facto new director of the F.B.C. That's right, he who can pull the sword shall be king, and she who can wield the service weapon shall be the director. She soon discovers that the reason the old house is seemingly deserted is because it's been invaded by a resonance-based lifeform known as the Hiss. This invasive power has taken control of everyone in the building who wasn't wearing an HRA, a piece of hardware handed out by Chief of Research Casper Darling a matter of weeks before this all started. Almost like he had an idea that something was coming. Thanks to the aid of Polaris though, Jesse is basically immune to the Hiss, and sets about trying to restore order to the oldest house, save as many people as possible, and in the process, maybe even find her brother, and figure out what the hell happened here. Her journey through every level of the house sees her dealing with all manner of absurd and outrageous things, and yet, it all makes sense to her now. In the outside world, her past was at best a joke, and at worst a harmful delusion she'd concocted to deal with her parents abandoning her. But here, it's all real, and it makes so much more sense to her this way. She is eventually reunited with her brother, who, while under the influence of the Hiss, is far more coherent than anyone else. This probably speaks somewhat to his status as a prime candidate, though he wildly rejects Polaris, who he believes abandoned him. The journey finally takes her into the interdimensional research area of the oldest house, where she discovers the slide projector was being used to study the world beyond Slide 36, where Jesse first found Polaris. The Bureau, it seems, also found Polaris, and even brought it back to Earth. And more importantly, while they were doing this, something got into Trench. Something insidious, a kind of hiss that over many years ate slowly away at him, finally leading him to inviting them into the oldest house. The final act sees Jesse breaking into the Hedron lab to find the Hiss creatures attacking the container that houses Polaris. She fights her way through them before finally breaking the creature out of its containment and discovering nothing. The Hiss finally invades Jesse's mind, and our game ends there. The post-game is a busywork simulator, where Jesse lives out a nightmare as an entry-level worker in the Bureau, constantly collecting coffee cups, depositing mail, and making copies, with every task refreshing once it's complete. Occasionally, you get to take a letter to Trench and... Wait. I know you from somewhere. I think. Something is very wrong. Jesse can feel it. Something is trying to destroy her. And as she starts to become aware of it, the illusion starts to break down. And finally, the girl gets it. You see, up until now, Jesse has accepted the mantle of director because doing so was convenient for her. The agents of the Bureau deferred to her without question for no other reason than she could use the service weapon, as though this is something that happens to them all the time. But now, she gets it. She's not here because she needs to save her brother, and this title isn't just a way for her to get around. This is the place her road was always leading, To use her own words,
"This is my mess to clean up. My fight. No one else's. I am the director."
And just like that, the message from Darling, the Bureau's head of research, can reach her, and she discovers that Hedron was not the source, but rather the catalyst. The true power, Polaris, was always inside her. And so she is able to fight back the Hiss presence within her, and enter the astral plane for the final showdown beneath the Black Pyramid. Our second significant protagonist in this game, rather than being a person, is usually what we'd reduce down to being a backdrop or setting. But the oldest house is so much more than that. This thing is very much alive, and clearly has a personality and wants of its own. Now, as you'd expect from what is essentially a building, whatever it is that it wants isn't something we can really comprehend. But we do know it has motives and intentions of its own. From the outside, the house is nothing more than another skyscraper on the New York landscape, made in the brutalist architectural style with no windows and completely invisible to anyone who isn't specifically looking for it, or otherwise attuned to the larger world that exists just beyond the veil of what we think we know. Now, I won't go into all the specifics of how we all got here, but the broad strokes are that the Federal Bureau of Control were investigating an altered world event in New York City and stumbled into the foundations of the house, which is about the only really stable part of the place. Here they found the nail, some kind of powerful object that connects the astral plane and the extra-dimensional entities now known as the Board to our reality. It wasn't long after that the Board basically assumed control of the F.B.C. through their connection with the director, and the Bureau moved into this concealed building to start using it as their base of operations. The house moves and changes a lot. Most digital equipment doesn't work there, and is prone to just exploding. This forces the Bureau to use only analog devices and ancient-looking computers and typewriters to run their operations. The interior is much like that of a TARDIS. While the house's exterior is by no means subtle, the inside is believed to be infinite in size. An entire pocket universe, or perhaps our reality, is in the house's pocket. This leads us to experiencing some truly drastic shifts in scale as we move from location to location, and lets the developers really show off what the Northlight engine can do. When we arrive in Central Executive, there is something old about it, but it feels stable, relatable. The corridors are narrow and the materials are recognizable. The old world feel could be explained away as frugal government spending, but then we get to places like this. There are several thresholds within the house too. These are areas where other realities bleed into our own, creating some truly insane moments in the game, and really allowing the level designers to go crazy with their work. Thresholds come and go, but during the game we encounter a few. Mainly the Black Quarry threshold, which is... look at this place. How cool is this? Then there's the Mold threshold, which leads us to engaging with this creature. Definitely one of the better boss fights in the game. Lots of devastating attacks and no cheap shots, and wow, it looks cool. And the last one being the Clock threshold. What the hell? Wow. Just wow. The Bureau stabilizes the house through the use of control points, which also act as our checkpoints and fast travel points throughout the game. From a lore perspective, controlling these points reduces the number of environmental shifts within an area, and allows day-to-day activities to take place, though they can still happen and range from a minor inconvenience, like the executive toilet disappearing, or people becoming trapped in remote areas of the building and unable to make contact with anyone. The more we try to unravel the mystery of the house, the more baffling it becomes. This is not a place that operates on the same kind of logic we do, and discovering its story is just as compelling as uncovering the story of Jesse and Dylan. In some ways, you could argue that the story of Jesse and Dylan is only there to facilitate exploring the house, and that it is in fact the main focus of the game. I guess it comes down to which was more interesting for you. But the house isn't the only place of power we visit in our adventure. There is one more, much smaller, yet equally compelling place of mystery here, with the Ocean View Motel and Casino. I love this place. I'm actually more fascinated by it than I am the oldest house. This tiny little staging ground is just so bizarre. Inside, it operates on weird dream logic that is represented by simple puzzles. There are no staff, and it's impossible to enter or leave via the front door. On one of our visits, we even hear, the F.B.C. have never found the actual location of the motel, and it can only be accessed from the oldest house via a pull cord light switch that must be pulled 3 times. Once the puzzle has been solved, Jesse will get a room key and be able to return to a somewhat altered version of the bureau. What's fascinating is we know even less about this place than we do the oldest house, and I'm curious to know what would happen to anyone who decided to spend the night there. Connecting these two magnificent mysteries, though, is one character: the janitor. A.W.E. is the first person we meet in the oldest house, a seemingly harmless Finnish man who is somehow capable of withstanding the hiss without a HRA, can move freely throughout the building, communicate via telepathy, and whose cassette player is a very potent object of power.
Take control.
That was awesome.
You said it, girl. A.W.E. was here before the F.B.C, and my guess is he was also here before the nail and the board too. He is again a true mystery. Seemingly harmless, and yet I feel, if he wanted to, he could eject the F.B.C and the board from the building with a single swipe of his brush. The fact that he hasn't yet, to me at least, implies that the house is perfectly fine with the current arrangement. For now, anyway. The third corner of the triangle that makes up this story is the F.B.C, a shadowed Men in Black style bureau that seems to operate all over the world. The purpose seems to be protection of said world and the collective perceived reality from things that exist outside of that realm. I say it seems to be because while that's no doubt what the F.B.C agents and management feel like they're doing, at the very heart of the F.B.C, linked through the director via the hotline, is the board. The board is an unknown paranatural entity or entities that exist in, communicate through the astral plane. They are inside, around, formed of, part of, represented by the Black Pyramid that we see within the astral plane. And this being the hub of their existence does seem to be confirmed by the fact this is where Dylan can be found trying to attack the board during the endgame. The board are themselves linked to the oldest house via the nail, which is something explained in the Foundation DLC. And while they claim dominion over the oldest house, I'm not so sure. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that the house suffers the board about as much as it suffers anyone else in there. In fact, were I a gambling man, I'd wager there's only one person who can claim dominion within the house itself. I could write a whole essay about this guy. I won't, but I really could. The board's motives are shrouded in mystery. Again, via the DLC, we are aware that there's been some dissent among their number, and even that their power is not absolute within the astral plane. Even so, the board seems content to let the F.B.C find and contain objects of power and altered items here in the oldest house. To this end, the F.B.C employs agents to investigate A.W.Es, which of course stand for Alan Wake. Which of course stand for Altered World Events. The Bureau basically turn up at the site of anything from haunted houses to interdimensional rifts, determine if any part of it is real, and bring back any altered items to be contained and studied so that the very nature of AWEs can be understood. The main problem here is that the sheer variety of altered world events makes it almost impossible to find any kind of pattern, and altered items can range from a pink flamingo that can twist reality around it, to an unpublished page of writing from a missing author. We'll get to this. Don't worry. Due to the Hiss invasion, the F.B.C. are represented in the game by the few members of Trench's management team who were wearing HRAs during the initial attack. Videos made by Head of Research Casper Darling, who I'm sure was meant to be an entertainer in another life, and the hard-boiled ramblings of the former director as he communicates with Jesse over the hotline. They're certainly an odd group for sure. Something I guess you'd expect from a group of people who have gotten used to working in a constantly shifting building, surrounded by inanimate objects that are just as dangerous as giant tigers. None of them seem at all surprised at Jesse arriving and immediately take her being the new director without question. Marshall, it seems, does have some reservations. She operated very closely with Trench, and has a much clearer idea of the scale of what the Bureau deals with, while many of the other characters are very much ignorant of just how much danger they are in on a daily basis. But almost everyone else just jumps on board as though this is the sort of thing that happens every Tuesday. The Northlight engine once again does a great job of bringing all the characters' faces to life, and the voice acting here is on par with Remedy's other games, which, as you should know by now, set a very high standard for the industry to follow. James McCaffrey is back, once again to steal the show as former director Trench. While most members of the F.B.C. seem to be doing a job and going home to some kind of normalcy on a daily basis, Trench is very much married to the house, the board, and the Bureau. This could all be on him, of course. The man clearly has trauma. He talks about not depending on others and only letting himself down, and even mentions that picking up the service weapon was basically a dare. He has a failed marriage and a daughter who passed away on account of him bringing work home. This could hint at some kind of malicious intent on behalf of the board, who may have orchestrated these events to ensure Trench would only have his work in his life. Or it could just be a metaphor for an unhealthy work ethic and an inability to trust people. Either way, the crown that sat upon his head was heavy, and his work was what ultimately led to the creation of the Prime Candidate program, bringing Dylan into the house, and finally destroyed him, and indeed led to the Hiss invading the Bureau. Darling is also another great character, and a welcome break from all the mounting tension, with his quirky little videos and oh so familiar voice.
Inside, they found a door marked with an inverted black pyramid. My name is Alan Wake, and I'm a writer.
It's almost shocking when we finally see him as he was, just before the invasion. All in all, these are a wonderful cast, and it was a pleasure getting to know them and working through this crisis together. So I talked in the Quantum Break retrospective about how Remedy basically iterates on a tried and tested formula of stylish third-person action from game to game. Control is not only another entry in this style of game, but is in fact the apex of their work so far. If I had to sum up how playing Control makes me feel, I'd say it feels exactly like playing Alan Wake, but with quite a few more years of development gone into it. Which, when you think about it, is exactly what we're getting. Only where Wake was a writer who could barely sprint 10 meters without getting fatigued, and used torches and flares to complement his guns, Jesse is a straight-up badass, who has a lot of very cool tricks at her disposal to take down her enemies. So I think at this point, we all know that Remedy do combat and gunplay very well indeed. And once you've got a fully spec'd out Jesse, you've basically got a character who can fly, dash, fire devastating projectiles from the service weapon, launch multiple objects at her enemies, and regenerates her health from pickups that are dropped by her enemies when they die. And well, if I said to you, hypermobile badass that cuts through their foes like an unstoppable force of nature, you might have something like this pop into your mind. And honestly, for me at least, this combat has a lot of Doom 2016 and Eternal built into its DNA. From the enemy varieties that can approach you from the ground or in the air, the big hitters that need to be avoided and taken down in a very specific way, to the need to just keep moving and make yourself as hard a target as possible, the combat can get really wild. And while just like Doom, it can be really frustrating at times, it can also be really satisfying. And when all the pieces fall into place perfectly, it really does start to create an image where, far from Jesse being locked in the oldest house with the hiss, they are in fact the ones locked in with her. Now there absolutely are a few problems with this combat, and we'll be getting to those, but even with those on the table, the action here is a real standout feature, and is once again a big step up for a studio that has made a habit of being really good at this. So what are the problems here? Well, some enemies are very unbalanced, and can reduce your health bar to nothing or almost nothing with a single hit that you could never see coming. I can't for the life of me figure out how these ever got through playtesting without being called out as cheap and frustrating. And I've had a few people tell me that the game suffers from too many cheap deaths as well, so I know this isn't just in my head or just about me being bad at the game. That being said, just like with Doom Eternal, there does appear to be a very specific way that this is meant to be played. This isn't a cover-based shooter, for example, or something strategic. You really do just have to keep moving, fire that service weapon, and use literally all your powers to win over the combat arenas. So, I guess we should talk a little bit about those powers. There's a lot more than in Quantum Break, though nothing as satisfying as that time stop bubble, or the time rush punch, but these are all great. Also, Jesse basically has a mana pool that she spends to use power, so they don't go into cooldown the moment they've been used. In fact, if you're doing a good job cycling these and firing the service weapon, you'll only find yourself caught without energy in only the worst of situations. As mentioned earlier, the oldest house is the containment room for altered items and objects of power, or OOPs. Oops. The main difference being that altered items are far too wild and chaotic to be controlled, but oops can be controlled, and the director can do so with exceptional results. The list of oops that Jesse uses goes service weapon, hotline, the floppy disk, the merry-go-round horse, the home safe, the X-ray light box, and the Benikoff TV. The service weapon is a bit special, as it's the only object of power bound to Jesse that doesn't use her internal energy. Well, neither does the hotline, but that's just a plot device really. This gun is your one and only weapon throughout the whole game, and the bad news is the standard grip has a really weak and dissatisfying sound effect that doesn't give you much in the way of feedback when you fire it. And when the enemies start to get spongy later, it can feel really weak and useless. The good news is though, it can be upgraded at control points and has a variety of forms. Everything from the shotgun-like shatter projectile to the rapid-fire spin form, charge shots and sticky grenades. There's literally something for everyone. Now, all forms of the weapon share the same ammo, which regenerates when the weapon is not in use. One decision I found a little odd is that you can only switch between two forms of the weapon at any given time. You set which two you want, as well as any upgrades you want to equip them in your inventory, then switch between them at the push of a button. And this is fine, except that you can go into your inventory menu while in combat. So since it's basically possible to use any form of the weapon at any time, why is 2 the magic number? Why not just have a weapon wheel or something very similar to cycle through forms? Either way, this weapon does kick ass, with most of the forms being useful in different situations and at different stages in the game, and all but the base grip giving really satisfying feedback when they're used. To go through the best of the rest now, the floppy disk grants the launch power, which is probably the most useful attack in the game, just due to the sheer staggering amount of damage it does. As you can imagine, launch literally lets Jesse rip all kinds of things up and launch them at her enemies. This can be upgraded to do more damage, use bigger objects, and when it's maxed out, up to 3 objects at once. And believe you me, That one's game changing, though spamming it will burn through your energy very quickly. Then there's the merry-go-round horse that grants the dash ability, and just like the rush maneuver in Quantum Break, this thing is there to save your life. The moment you hear a rocket fire or the beeping of an incoming grenade, just hold a direction and smash that button to get out of there fast. There are a few enemy types that also possess this ability, so hitting them with a launch attack can be very difficult. But stun them a few times with the service weapon, or wait for them to attack you, and you can usually catch them off guard. The home safe lets you raise a defensive shield that can really help in a pinch, though overall I didn't use this one that much. It was only especially useful against the final boss in the A.W.E expansion, though I've been told it can be very useful against these guys. Now the X-ray light box is a good one. It basically lets you control the minds of enemies with low health, and again, while I use this in a limited capacity, in some of the bigger firefights, this can be a real lifesaver. The enemies you control aren't all that potent, but what they do is buy you a bit of respite. They give other enemies something else to shoot at, rather than you, and can allow you to get rid of a particularly dangerous creature like these. Seriously, fuck these things. And finally, the TV gives you the levitation ability, which not only opens up a lot of areas in the game that you couldn't previously reach, but really changes up combat by bringing verticality into the mix. Now sure, gliding through the air does put you right out in the open where everyone can see you, but combined with the dash and launch, this is a great way to control the battlefield. Oh, and also, you can upgrade it to do this. I am Iron Man. What's great is every time you pick up a new object of power, you get this little tutorial on the astral plane that helps you understand how and when it works, and all these powers are very intuitively bound to buttons on your pad, and there are little on-screen prompts as well, so that you never feel like you're mashing buttons wildly and wasting energy because you chose the wrong ability to use at the wrong time. When all these powers are combined, Jesse becomes Captain Planet, a real force to be reckoned with. While there is a bit of a difficulty spike in the mid-game, it really seems to have balanced out by the end, and you can just keep pushing forward and bringing down enemies in droves as you work to save the oldest house and the Bureau. But Control isn't all about combat. It's very exploration and traversal focused too, and this is just as important and enjoyable as the combat in its own way. This is in fact Control's biggest departure from the tried and tested Remedy formula. From Max Payne right through to Quantum Break, the studio have always made very linear experiences with a straightforward level progression. In Control, however, rather than having levels, we simply have the oldest house, and are basically free to explore it from the depths of its basement to the upper levels of the Panopticon in whatever way we see fit. Well, almost anyway. Remember, when we arrive, the building is under lockdown, to say nothing of the damage it sustained from the Hiss invasion, so we are forced onto a very linear path at the start. However, much in the style of a metroidvania or an old school survival horror game, we soon find ourselves with the necessary keys and powers to begin unlocking a lot of this place. And with every new upgrade comes an incentive to return to earlier areas and see what secrets can be uncovered now. This in and of itself is great, as the oldest house is a really interesting place, literally chock full of mysteries to explore, and more environmental storytelling than I could possibly cover in a single video. But what further helps it is the variety of side quests you can pick up from the various members of the F.B.C management team you stumble across on your journey. Being something of an open game, this is the first time Remedy got the opportunity to integrate side stories and subplots that run alongside the main narrative, and these are mostly okay. There is definitely some busy work here, and if you decide to just do a big chunk of these in a row, it's going to feel grindy for sure, and you'll be very thankful for all those fast travel points you've unlocked, given just how spaced out so many of these objectives are. There's a method to this madness though, as while the side quests do provide you with skill points that are going to make the later game a lot easier for you, I feel that their main purpose in the game is to make you go back and check out areas you've already been to basically make you take a second look at something and find those little details that the devs have hidden all over the place and help you get a full picture of the scale and sheer absurdity of this whole operation. I'd say the standout side quests are any that have you dealing with altered objects, as the writers and developers really let their imaginations run wild with these things in terms of what they can do and how they affect the world around them. Everything from seeing these things literally twist space and time just by moving through it, to literally changing the game into a fast-paced rail shooter like something straight out of Tron. A few of these end in interesting boss fights too, though these are played with some cheap moves, but I've already gone over that and really don't want to rant. I mean, I could. I'm very particular about what makes a good boss battle, so I could rant a lot, but I won't. Well, I think we all knew this was coming in some way or another. During the development of Control, Remedy successfully reacquired the rights to Alan Wake from Microsoft for somewhere in the region of 2.5 million euros, which, given Microsoft have more than enough money and had absolutely no interest in doing anything with the character, could be considered something of a dick move on their end. I mean, why not just give it back? You'd get exactly the same amount of money as you're getting now from it, and while you're at it, why not just hand over Quantum Break rights too? Seriously, you're not doing anything with it, and you're never going to do anything with it, so why are you sitting on it? Okay, that aside, Remedy getting the rights back to Alan Wake meant they could remaster the original game, finally get it released on the PlayStation, and also bring him into Control to solidify the idea of a Remedyverse, while foreshadowing what was to come next. The first appearance in the base game comes in the form of a simple Easter egg found in one of the secret rooms in the Panopticon. It's something so abstract, it could easily be written off as just fan service. But the A.W.E expansion takes things to a whole other level. The mission begins after you've finished the Face of the Enemy mission, when you approach the elevator and a new voice reaches out to Jesse over the hotline.
There was a new button on the elevator control panel. Investigation Sector.
And just like our intrepid writer says, a new button for the investigation section has now appeared on the elevator, opening up a new area for us to explore. You'd be forgiven at this point for wanting to rush up there straight away and investigate this further, but rest assured, you're about to meet some really tough enemies, so it's in your best interest to maybe do this after you've finished the main story. Once you do get up there though, you're in for a real treat. This is far more than some fan service. The incident at Bright Falls was a full-blown altered world event that was investigated by the Bureau, and Alan Wake's disappearance was international news. Just like in the base game, we've got tons of documents to stumble onto concerning interviews, the site, Alice, and maybe even Mr. Scratch. There's even one correspondence concerning an FBI agent named Alex Casey, who contacted the Bureau in search of information about Alan's case. I mean, I know synergy is something we've already encountered a lot in this game, but what are the odds here? Probably about the same as someone called Bowser running Nintendo of America. But as with many of our trips into new areas of the oldest house, we're going to need to detour through that coolest of places, the Ocean View Motel and Casino. And this time it seems, one room is occupied. And here he is, alive, though maybe not so well. And who is he talking to?
Who are you? Do I know you?
I'm your friend Tom. Tom Zane.
Zane? Really?
The poet.
Or is it?
Diver, you look different.
I have so many questions right now, but bro, honestly, I'm just so damn happy to see you. Once we get back on track, we are treated to something even better. Well, just as good, I guess. So this entire area was evacuated and sealed up during the Trench administration when something terrible got loose and tore the place to pieces. And as we listen to various recordings and hear Alan's narration over the hotline, we come to realize that our antagonist is none other than Dr. Hartman. Remember this guy? Actually, can we just see that again?
Where?
And again.
Where?
And one more time, please, Alan.
Where?
Yeah. Fuck that guy. I really can't say enough good things about this expansion, though. This is so much more than some repurposed assets. It actually brings in a Nemesis-style boss monster to add an element of horror to the game that wasn't present before. Dr. Hartman, you see, is far from just another Taken. He had already mutated into something powerful enough to cause Trench to order the entire investigation sector evacuated and sealed up. But now the darkness has found the hiss, and they have merged into something else entirely. The investigation sector is a massive new area, with lots of traversal and combat, as well as several new side quests. Whenever you enter an area where Hartman is, you've basically got to dash between light sources as quick as possible, spend too long in the dark, and you'll be met with the most devastating of consequences. This game of cat and mouse climaxes in the Bright Falls A.W.E area with, are you sitting down? An incredible boss fight. This is a big win for a studio that in my eyes have never been good at making boss fights. Even within the base game, they often resort to cheap tricks like instant death from falling, or artificial difficulty by bringing in goons to distract you from your primary target, and create an opportunity for them to get a free hit on you. They've also straight up just never bothered with final bosses either, though I don't think that this is a bad thing, and I actually wish a few more studios would take their cue from Remedy about this. You don't have to have a boss fight if your final level has all of the climax you need. The final assault on the Black Pyramid in Control is an amazing moment, and wouldn't have been improved by having some kind of bullet sponge half-arsed in at the end. The same can be said for Alan Wake and Quantum Break, though I do feel Paul really deserved better. He was set up as such a badass in the game, yet in the final gunfight, he's little more than a glorified environmental hazard. Hartman is a real challenge, with devastating attacks and a few different phases to him to keep you on your toes. He does spawn in a couple of ads here and there, but they only arrive in certain phases and aren't specifically there to give Hartman a chance to get a free hit on Jesse, so I'll let this one slide. To beat Hartman, you need to wield your powers effectively, managing both your ammo and energy expertly, or risk being caught in the open with a devastating attack homing in on you, and no way to protect yourself from it. I never felt cheated when this guy put me down, and each failure only made me come back at him harder, as opposed to having me smash the Alt F4 key and storming out of my apartment. And when all is finally said and done, we get an inkling of some wonderful news to come in the future.
Ma'am, I'm getting something on my terminal here, an A.W.E alert from Bright Falls, Washington. But it might be a glitch. The date's all wrong, a couple of years in the future.
So there it is. Control. A truly impressive metroidvania set in an absolutely fascinating setting, with well-written characters, a plot you can actually care about, and so much mystery and intrigue that a man could make a career just exploring and talking about all the details and documents and weird little events that this thing is absolutely packed full of. The combat does get a bit frustrating and grindy at times, but the intrigue keeps you coming back for more. And while a little part of me wants to refuse that Remedy has ever produced anything better than Max Payne 2, well, it wouldn't be very flattering for me to imply that this studio peaked in 2003 and have never produced anything better since. This really is Remedy at the very top of their game. From writing to world building to gameplay, this is an A+ adventure and a wonderful game. I had such a great time going through this, and I couldn't be more excited to find out what's coming next. For now though, The Hiss have been defeated, but the lockdown must remain in effect until their presence has been completely eradicated from the building. But I'd say the operation is in good hands.
I'm the director of the Federal Bureau of Control. We're in this together. You and I.
Well guys, what a ride it's been. From the streets of New York all the way to the astral plane and back again. Remedy have taken us to some incredible places and let us walk in the shoes of some of gaming's most memorable characters. And while I'm just about done with third-person shooters for a long time, I can't deny just how much fun it's been to go on this journey. This Finnish studio really are masters of interactive storytelling, and are now in the process of doing something with their intellectual properties that's never been done before. It's a shame Joyce won't be able to join the party, at least for now anyway. The Oldest House and the concept of other dimensions is a great way to blend modern sci-fi and existential horror. There is also the issue of Max. Max belongs to Rockstar now, and likewise his gritty adventures don't really fit the tone of Wake or Control. On the other hand, Alan Wake has written several novels about a hard-boiled detective who has Sam Lake's face and James McCaffrey's voice. And if you hunt around the Oldest House a little, you might get the idea that he's found his way from the pages of Alan's books into the same reality as director Faden. We have reached the end of our journey through Remedy's work, but not the end. Alan Wake's remaster launched in 2021, and in November of the same year, Remedy announced a new studio in Sweden that would open in 2022. This expansion is only going to accelerate their output, and who knows what great adventures await us in the future. If you're watching this, I just wanted to say thank you, especially those of you who watched this right through to the end. I really appreciate that you came here just to listen to me ramble on about games that I like for an hour. Being a small content creator, I appreciate every like and comment that gets sent my way, so if you happen to like what you've seen here today, well, let me know. And if you're really into it, well, maybe subscribe and take a look around the channel. There's plenty more here and a lot more in the works. This is usually the part where I tease what's coming next, and while the next project is on the way, I'm not ready to talk about it just yet. We'll be staying in the 5th and 6th console generations for a while though, I think, and maybe even a brief jaunt even further back than that. But I'll be letting you all know what's coming very soon. To everyone who stuck with me all the way through this YouTube journey since it started in January, I want to say a very special thank you. And finally, Alan, if you can hear me, you're coming through clear now. Hold on, son. We're gonna get you out of there.
You have been warned.